It was a rainy Friday evening when the whispers started again. A group of boys near the corner of the cafe laughed, nudging one another, their eyes darting toward a young woman seated alone at a table near the window. Her name was Zara. She was in her early 20s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a confidence in her posture that made her stand out in the otherwise quiet street of the small town. "She's always alone, always dressed like that, easy pickings," one boy snickered, loud enough for the others to laugh along. They didn't know her story. And they didn't care to. From across the room, someone else was watching. Not judging. Not mocking. Just watching, quietly. His name was Adam, a man in his mid-30s, rugged from life, eyes gentle but protective, the kind of man who carried both wounds and wisdom. His daughter Lily, a bubbly 7-year-old with curls that never stayed tamed, sat beside him, swinging her legs under the table, slurping on a chocolate milkshake. He'd brought her here every Friday since her mother passed away 2 years ago. A ritual of sorts. Something that made Lily smile. But tonight, his attention was divided. Because he saw the boys, and more importantly, he saw Zara. How her shoulders tensed. How she stirred her coffee without sipping it. How she kept her gaze fixed out the window, pretending not to hear the words. But words are sharp. Especially when they're laced with cruelty. Lily noticed too. "Daddy, why do those boys keep laughing at that lady?" Adam didn't answer at first. He was waiting. Watching. Hoping maybe someone else would say something. But no one did. People noticed, sure, but they all chose silence. That kind of silence that hurts more than the laughter. Then it happened. One of the boys stood and approached Zara's table, phone in hand, pretending to scroll but making sure his friends could hear every word. "Hey," he said with a smirk. "You're the one they all talk about, right? Heard you're easy company." Zara froze. Her fingers gripped the edge of her table, knuckles white. She looked up at him, her lips parting to speak, but what would she say? She'd done this before. Ignored. Endured. Walked away. But tonight, someone else stood up before she had to. Adam placed his hand gently on Lily's shoulder. "Stay here, sweetie," he whispered. He walked over, slow and steady. The boy barely noticed him until Adam was standing right beside Zara's table. Adam's voice was calm, low, but each word struck like thunder. "Is that how your mother raised you to speak to women?" The boy blinked, stunned. His smirk faltered. I was just joking." "No, you weren't," Adam said, eyes never leaving the boy's face. "You were humiliating someone you don't know. In public. To impress friends who don't even have the decency to stop you." The cafe fell silent. The boy laughed awkwardly, but the sound rang hollow. "Look, man, it's not that serious." Adam stepped a little closer. "She came here for coffee. You came here for attention. Now go back to your table before I give you the kind of attention you won't forget." That did it. The boy turned and walked back, his face red. His friends avoided eye contact. None of them laughed this time. Zara still hadn't moved. Adam turned to her. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "Thank you. I'm used to it. But thank you." He pulled the chair across from her and sat down. "You shouldn't have to be used to it." They spoke for a few minutes. Simple words. Gentle understanding. She told him her name. Told him she worked 2 jobs and was taking night classes to become a nurse. That people made assumptions because of how she looked. Because she wasn't from around here. Because small towns could be cruel. He told her about Lily. About how hard it had been after losing his wife. How judgment came in many forms, he'd heard it too. A single dad? Probably irresponsible, selfish, can't raise a kid alone. Zara smiled for the first time that evening. People are quick to name what they don't understand. He nodded. But they don't get to define us. That night, Zara walked out with her head a little higher. Not because a man stood up for her, but because someone finally saw her. The next week, Adam invited her to join him and Lily for their usual Friday visit. At first, she hesitated. But Lily's excitement won her over. The three of them quickly became a familiar sight, laughing, sharing stories, trading Lily's crayon doodles. People started to whisper again, but this time with different tones. "Isn't she that girl?" "Yeah, but maybe we were wrong." Time passed, and slowly, the judgments faded. People saw Zara for who she truly was, strong, kind, and deeply caring. Especially when Lily grew sick one day at school and Zara rushed from work just to hold her until Adam arrived. And then, one evening, those same boys walked into the cafe again. A new girl had just joined the staff. Shy. 17. Clearly nervous. They tried their old game again, whispers, stares, laughs. But this time, the cafe didn't stay silent. Zara stood up first. Then Adam. Then even the cashier, a middle-aged woman who had once stayed quiet too long. "We don't do that here," Zara said, voice steady. The boys left, not with laughter, but with shame. Because now, this place had changed. Zara would go on to finish her degree. She got her license and started working full-time at the community hospital. Adam and Zara remained close. Very close. For Lily, she became more than a friend, she became family. On Lily's 8th birthday, she said the words that melted every heart in the room. "Can Zara come live with us? She makes everything better." And in time, she did. Not because she needed saving. But because she belonged. So when people ask Adam now, "How did you two meet?" he smiles and says, "She was being called names by people who didn't know her, and I couldn't stay silent." Because standing up for someone doesn't just protect them, it reminds them of their worth. If you felt something watching this, if you believe kindness can change lives, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Because somewhere out there, someone's being misjudged right now. And your voice might be the one that makes them believe in people again. Poor single dad rents room to a strange pregnant girl unaware she's a runaway millionaire heiress. The rain pounded against the windows like angry fists as Ellie Montgomery Pierce, 7 months pregnant and dressed in clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, stood on the doorstep of the most ordinary house she'd ever seen. This was it, her last chance at freedom before her father married her off to merge family empires. What she couldn't possibly know was that the tired-eyed man about to answer the door, with unpaid bills scattered across his kitchen table, would change her life forever, just as she would change his. If you're enjoying this story of unexpected connections and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming content that reminds us all that family isn't always about blood. Jack Reynolds stared at the stack of bills, running his calloused hand through his graying hair. At 42, he hadn't expected to be raising his 12-year-old daughter alone in a house that seemed to need a new repair every week. The teaching job at the local high school barely covered their expenses, and now the hot water heater was making that ominous rattling sound again. "Dad, someone's at the door," called Lily from the living room, where she was working on her science project. Jack sighed, pushing back from the kitchen table. The room for rent sign had been in the front yard for 3 weeks with no takers. He couldn't blame people, the neighborhood wasn't fancy, and the spare bedroom was small. But they needed the money desperately. When he opened the door, he wasn't prepared for what he saw. A young woman, maybe early 20s, stood shivering on his porch. Her blonde hair was plastered to her face from the rain, and her expensive-looking coat couldn't hide her very pregnant belly. "I saw your sign," she said, her voice carrying an accent he couldn't quite place. The kind that spoke of private schools and summer homes. Is the room still available? Jack hesitated. A pregnant woman wasn't what he'd expected. It's not much, he warned. Just a bedroom with a shared bathroom. That's perfect, she said quickly. Too quickly. Her eyes darted behind her to the street, where a taxi was pulling away. I can pay 3 months in advance. Cash. Every instinct told Jack something wasn't right. But the woman, barely more than a girl, really, looked desperate, and the mention of 3 months' rent in advance made his financial anxiety quiet down just enough. I'm Jack, he said, stepping aside. Come in out of the rain, at least. Ellie, she replied, stepping inside. Ellie Smith. The pause before her surname wasn't lost on Jack, but he chose not to comment. Ellie Montgomery Pierce had never washed a dish in her life until she moved into Jack Reynolds' modest 3-bedroom home in suburban Pennsylvania. The heiress to the Montgomery Pierce shipping fortune had spent 23 years in mansions with staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts, making messes vanish before she even noticed them. Now, standing at Jack's kitchen sink, she scrubbed at a pan with more determination than skill, while Lily sat at the table working on homework. You're doing it wrong, Lily said matter-of-factly, not looking up from her math problems. I'm sorry. The pan. You need to let it soak first. That's what Dad always does. Ellie looked down at the pan where she'd been furiously scrubbing at baked-on lasagna for 10 minutes. Oh. It's okay. Dad says everyone has to learn sometime. Lily finally looked up, her serious brown eyes, so like her father's, studying Ellie. Did your mom never teach you? The question hit Ellie like a physical blow. My mother wasn't much for teaching practical skills, she said carefully. She was busy. Mine died when I was 4, Lily said with the blunt honesty of children. Cancer. I'm sorry, Ellie said, meaning it. Her own mother was very much alive, though emotionally absent, currently on her 3rd month-long spa retreat of the year. It's okay. I don't remember her much. Dad says I have her smile. Lily went back to her homework. You can leave the pan. I'll show you how to do it properly tomorrow. Ellie nodded, drying her hands on a dish towel. She'd been at the Reynolds house for 2 weeks, and every day brought new revelations about how the other half, the normal half, lived. Jack worked long hours at the high school, often bringing home papers to grade. Lily was self-sufficient in a way that made Ellie's heart ache, making her own lunch and handling her own laundry. Meanwhile, Ellie's phone remained off, tucked into the bottom of her bag. She knew her father would be looking for her by now. Richard Montgomery Pierce didn't take kindly to having his plans disrupted, and her disappearance had certainly done that. The merger with the Whitman family, sealed with her marriage to their odious son Bradley, was supposed to be announced next month. Bradley, who had gotten her pregnant during what she'd thought was a genuine romance, only to laugh when she told him, assuring her that the problem could be taken care of before the wedding. But Ellie had made her choice. This baby was hers, not a Montgomery Pierce heir, not a business asset. She had enough money, liquidated stocks her grandmother had left her, to start over somewhere. She just needed time to figure out where. Jack watched from the doorway as Ellie awkwardly folded laundry in the living room. There was something endearing about her determined concentration on such a simple task. In the month she'd been living with them, he'd noticed many such moments, her amazement at making cookies from scratch with Lily, her pride when she successfully unclogged the bathroom sink. You know, he said, stepping into the room, for someone who claims to have been a nanny, you're surprisingly unfamiliar with household chores. Ellie's hands froze on the towel she was folding. I was more of a governess type. Languages and etiquette, not so much domestic work. Jack nodded, not believing her for a second. In the past weeks, he'd noticed too many inconsistencies, her perfect posture, the way she sometimes slipped and used words no ordinary person would use, how she'd never heard of budget brands at the grocery store. "Your family must be worried about you," he said carefully. Ellie's eyes flashed with something, fear. "I don't have family," she said too quickly. "Everyone has someone," Jack pressed gently. "Especially when they're expecting a baby." Ellie's hands moved to her swollen belly protectively. "The baby's father made it clear he wants nothing to do with us. And my parents." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "My parents have their own plans for my life that don't include me being a single mother." Jack recognized the pain in her voice. Whatever she was running from, it was real. "Well," he said, picking up a shirt to fold, "for what it's worth, Lily and I are glad you're here. The house feels warmer somehow." Ellie's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Thank you for saying that." What Jack didn't say was how much he'd come to look forward to their evening conversations after Lily went to bed. How Ellie's perspective on his students' essays was insightful and thoughtful. How, for the first time since his wife died, the house felt like a home again. "Dad, I think something's wrong with Ellie," Lily said, bursting into Jack's classroom after school. She was really pale this morning, and she said her back hurt really bad. Jack's heart raced. Ellie wasn't due for another month. "Did you call her?" "She's not answering her phone." 20 minutes later, Jack burst through his front door, Lily on his heels. They found Ellie on the kitchen floor, her face contorted in pain. "The baby," she gasped. "Something's wrong." The next hours passed in a blur, the ambulance, the hospital, the doctor's concerned faces. "Preeclampsia," they said. "Dangerous for both mother and baby." They needed to perform an emergency C-section. "Family only in the delivery room," the nurse said firmly. "He is family," Ellie said, gripping Jack's hand so tightly her knuckles were white. "He's my family." In that moment, Jack realized the truth of her words. Somehow, in just 2 months, this mysterious young woman had become family to him and Lily. Eleanor Montgomery Pierce. The booming voice cut through the peaceful quiet of Ellie's hospital room 3 days later. Jack, who had been dozing in the chair beside her bed while she nursed her tiny but healthy daughter, jerked awake. A tall, imposing man in an expensive suit stood in the doorway, flanked by what could only be security personnel. "Father," Ellie said, her voice small but steady. Jack stood, instinctively positioning himself between Ellie's bed and the newcomers. "Sir, this is a hospital. I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice." Richard Montgomery Pierce looked at Jack as if he were something unpleasant stuck to his shoe. "And who exactly are you?" "This is Jack," Ellie said, sitting up straighter in her bed. "He's been taking care of me while you were busy trying to sell me to the Whitmans." Jack's mind reeled. Montgomery Pierce. One of the wealthiest families in the country. And Ellie, his quiet, determined tenant who struggled to use the washing machine, was their daughter. "Don't be dramatic, Eleanor," Richard said dismissively. "The arrangement with Bradley would have secured both families' futures. Instead, you disappear for months, only to be discovered in." He looked around the modest hospital room with distaste. "These circumstances." "These circumstances," Ellie said, her voice growing stronger, "include the birth of your granddaughter. Her name is Charlotte. Charlotte Hope Reynolds." Jack's head snapped toward Ellie in surprise. She'd given the baby his last name? Richard's face darkened. "This is absurd. You're coming home now. We'll sort out this situation privately." "No." Ellie's voice was calm but firm. "Charlotte and I aren't going anywhere with you. I'm 23 years old, Father. The trust from grandmother is mine now. I don't need your money or your approval. You think you can just walk away from your responsibilities? From who you are?" Richard demanded. I'm not walking away from my responsibilities, Ellie countered. I'm finally accepting them. My responsibility is to my daughter now, to give her a life filled with love, not business arrangements. Jack watched the standoff between father and daughter, feeling like he'd stumbled into someone else's movie. But when Richard took a step toward the bed, Jack found himself standing taller. "Sir," he said quietly, "I think you should leave now. Ellie needs rest." "Ellie?" Richard scoffed. "You don't even know her real name." "I know who she is," Jack replied simply. "That's enough for me." 6 months later, Jack sat on the porch swing, watching as Ellie pushed Lily on the tire swing hanging from the old oak tree. Baby Charlotte gurgled happily in her carrier beside him. After Richard Montgomery Pierce had stormed out of the hospital room, Ellie had told Jack everything, about her family's wealth, about Bradley's betrayal, about her desperate escape. She'd offered to leave, certain that Jack wouldn't want the complications her presence brought. Instead, he'd asked her to stay. Not in the spare bedroom, but as part of their family. Not because she was a Montgomery Pierce with a trust fund that had paid off his mortgage and established college funds for both Lily and Charlotte, but because somewhere between washing dishes and midnight feedings, they'd fallen in love. Ellie looked up from the yard and caught his eye, her smile radiant. She whispered something to Lily, who giggled and nodded enthusiastically. Later that night, after Charlotte was asleep and Lily had gone to bed, Ellie joined Jack on the porch swing. "I never thought I'd find this," she said softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Find what?" "A real home. A place where I'm just Ellie, not a Montgomery Pierce. A family who loves me for me." Jack wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into." Ellie nodded. "My father called today." Jack tensed slightly. Richard had made several attempts to persuade Ellie to return to the fold, each more desperate than the last as the Montgomery Pierce stock had taken hits from the scandal of his daughter's very public defection. "He wants to meet Charlotte," she continued. "Properly this time. No lawyers, no security. Just, as a grandfather." "And what do you want?" Ellie was quiet for a moment. "I want Charlotte to know where she comes from, but also to understand that her worth isn't tied to her name or her inheritance. I want her to know how to wash dishes and fold laundry and be kind to people who have less than she does." "Sounds like you've already figured out the most important parts of parenting," Jack said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I had a good teacher," she replied, smiling up at him. "You showed me what real family looks like." As the porch swing rocked gently in the summer evening, Jack reflected on how strangely life worked out sometimes. A desperate decision to rent a room to a mysterious pregnant girl had led to healing for both of them. Ellie finding the loving family she'd never had, and Jack opening his heart again after years of loneliness. Sometimes, he thought, the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary places. Thank you for watching this story of unexpected connections and the families we create. If you enjoyed this journey with Jack, Ellie, Lily, and baby Charlotte, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us that sometimes the greatest treasures come into our lives when we least expect them. Share in the comments if you've ever experienced an unexpected blessing that changed your life's direction. Millionaire CEO mocked blind date with single dad unaware he would save her life the next day. The surgeon's hands trembled as he looked at the monitor. "We're losing her," he said, his voice barely audible over the frantic beeping of machines. If that man hadn't been there. He shook his head, knowing how differently this would have ended without the quick thinking of someone the patient had ridiculed just hours before. 24 hours earlier, Alexandra Winters had been laughing about him over expensive champagne with her friends. Now, her life hung in the balance, and the only person who could save her was the very man she had dismissed as not worth her time. If you think you know where this story is heading, I promise you don't. What happens next changed not just 2 lives, but an entire community forever. Like, subscribe, and stay with me, because the moment these two souls reconnected will leave you speechless. Alexandra Winters tapped her manicured fingernails against the marble countertop of her penthouse kitchen. At 36, she had everything society told her she should want: CEO position at a tech company she'd built from scratch, a wardrobe full of designer clothes, and a view of Manhattan that most people only saw in movies. What she didn't have was someone to share it with, a fact her mother reminded her of during their weekly Sunday calls. "I don't need a dating app, Mother," Alexandra said, phone pressed between her ear and shoulder as she poured herself a glass of Pinot Noir. "I meet plenty of eligible men through work." "And yet you're still single," her mother replied with the particular tone that only mothers can perfect. "Just try it. One date. For me." That's how Alexandra found herself sitting at an upscale restaurant the following Friday night, checking her watch every 2 minutes. Her date was late. 7 minutes late, to be exact, and in Alexandra's world, tardiness was unforgivable. She was about to leave when a slightly disheveled man rushed through the door. "Alexandra?" he asked, slightly out of breath. "I'm Jack. I'm so sorry I'm late. My daughter's babysitter got stuck in traffic, and I had to wait until my neighbor could come over." Alexandra's perfectly arched eyebrow raised slightly. "You have a child?" "Yes, Emma. She's 6. Jack smiled, and for a brief moment, his face transformed with genuine warmth. "She's the center of my universe." Alexandra nodded stiffly. The dating profile hadn't mentioned children. Strike one. As the evening progressed, Alexandra learned that Jack was a high school science teacher who volunteered at a community center on weekends. He lived in a modest apartment in Brooklyn and drove a 10-year-old sedan. Strike 2, 3, and 4. "So, what do you do?" Jack asked, genuinely interested. "I'm the CEO of Horizon Technologies," Alexandra replied, waiting for the impressed reaction she usually received. "That's the company developing those medical devices, right? I read about your work bringing affordable healthcare technology to underserved communities. That's incredible." Alexandra blinked, surprised he knew about that aspect of her company rather than just its billion-dollar valuation. Despite herself, she felt a tiny spark of interest. But then Jack's phone buzzed. He checked it quickly, apologizing. "Sorry, it's the babysitter. Emma had a nightmare." The remainder of the date was punctuated by 2 more calls about his daughter. By the end of the night, Alexandra's initial judgment was cemented. A single father with a demanding child and a modest income was not what she was looking for. When Jack suggested they meet again, Alexandra gave him a polite but firm rejection. Later that night, at her friend Vanessa's bachelorette party, Alexandra recounted the date to peals of laughter. "A teacher? With a kid?" Vanessa giggled, the champagne making her words slightly slurred. "What was the app thinking, matching you with him? He showed up 10 minutes late because of babysitter issues," Alexandra said, embellishing slightly. "And his idea of a nice restaurant was a place where the wine list had prices under $50 a bottle." The women laughed, and Alexandra joined in, pushing away the small voice in her head that reminded her how Jack's eyes had lit up when he talked about his student science fair projects, or how he'd asked thoughtful questions about her work instead of her net worth. What Alexandra couldn't know, was that in less than 24 hours, her entire perspective would change. Because sometimes, life has a way of humbling even the most successful among us. The next morning, Alexandra woke early for her Saturday ritual, a 5-mile run through Central Park followed by a green smoothie at her favorite organic cafe. The September air was crisp, perfect for running. She pushed herself harder than usual, trying to outrun the strange feeling of emptiness that had settled in her chest after last night's date. As she rounded a curve in the path, Alexandra felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. She slowed, thinking she'd pushed too hard, but the pain intensified. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she stumbled, reaching for a nearby bench. "Are you okay?" a voice asked from somewhere far away. Alexandra tried to respond, but her words slurred. The last thing she saw before collapsing was a pair of concerned eyes that seemed strangely familiar. Jack had taken Emma to the Central Park Zoo that morning, a Saturday tradition they both cherished. They were heading toward the sea lion exhibit when he spotted a woman on a bench, clearly in distress. It took him a moment to recognize her, Alexandra from last night's date, now pale and clutching her chest. His teacher's instincts kicked in immediately. "Emma, stay right here," he instructed his daughter firmly before rushing to Alexandra's side. By the time he reached her, Alexandra was slumping over. Jack caught her before she hit the ground, immediately checking for a pulse. It was there, but weak and irregular. "Someone call 911, he shouted to the gathering crowd. Then, to Alexandra, "Stay with me. Help is coming." Her eyes fluttered open briefly. "Jack?" she whispered, confusion evident in her voice. "I'm here," he assured her, taking her hand. "You're going to be okay." But Jack knew enough about medical emergencies to recognize that Alexandra was experiencing something serious, possibly a heart attack, despite her young age and apparent fitness. Her lips were turning blue, a sign of poor oxygen circulation. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as nothing short of heroic. Jack began CPR when Alexandra's pulse faded, continuing until paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. Those 7 minutes, the same number of minutes Jack had been late to their date, would prove crucial in saving Alexandra's life. If you're finding this story moving, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that reminds us how quickly life can change and how connections can form in the most unexpected ways. In the ambulance, Alexandra drifted in and out of consciousness. Through the fog, she heard Jack explaining to the paramedics that she had no known health conditions, information he remembered from their conversation the night before. He mentioned her high-stress job and recent complaints about heartburn, details Alexandra herself might have dismissed as unimportant. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Alexandra had experienced a rare type of heart attack called spontaneous coronary artery dissection, SCAD, which often affects otherwise healthy women with few risk factors. The cardiologist later told her that without the immediate CPR she received, the outcome could have been fatal. When Alexandra fully regained consciousness in the ICU, the first face she saw wasn't her assistants or any of her wealthy friends. It was Jack's, sitting quietly in a chair beside her bed, reading a children's book to Emma, who was curled up on his lap. "You're here," Alexandra said, her voice raspy from the breathing tube that had been removed earlier. Jack looked up, relief washing over his features. "You're awake. Thank goodness." "Why are you here?" she asked, genuinely confused. After how dismissively she'd treated him, his presence made no sense. Jack shrugged, a simple gesture that conveyed more humanity than Alexandra had encountered in years of corporate boardrooms. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. Emma and I have been taking shifts with your assistant. She's getting coffee right now." Alexandra's eyes filled with tears. "After how I treated you last night." "What do you mean?" Jack asked, genuinely confused. "I was unkind. In my thoughts, at least. I judged you for being late, for being a teacher, for being a single dad. I even mocked our date to my friends afterward." The confession tumbled out, perhaps loosened by the medication or the near-death experience, or perhaps by the simple kindness Jack had shown her. Jack was quiet for a moment. "We all make judgments," he said finally. "What matters is if we're willing to revise them when we learn more." Emma looked up from her book. "Daddy says we should always give people second chances because everyone has a story we don't know yet." Alexandra felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had nothing to do with her physical condition and everything to do with the walls she'd built around her heart. The days that followed brought a parade of visitors, business associates, employees, friends. They brought expensive flowers and gourmet gift baskets. But it was Jack and Emma who brought what Alexandra needed most. Genuine company and a perspective that had nothing to do with her wealth or status. Jack came every evening after school, sometimes with Emma, sometimes alone when his neighbor could babysit. He brought homemade soup, my late wife's recipe, he explained, and stories about his students that made Alexandra laugh despite her pain. During one visit, Alexandra asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why did you keep coming back? After I was so cold to you on our date?" Jack considered this. "When I was 28, my wife was diagnosed with cancer. She died when Emma was just 2. I learned then that life is too short for grudges or games. When someone needs help, you help them, it's that simple." "I don't think I've ever thought that way," Alexandra admitted. "In business, every relationship is strategic. Every action has an expected return. And how's that working out for you?" Jack asked gently. The question hung in the air, unanswered but profound. As Alexandra's recovery progressed, she began to see her life through new eyes. The penthouse that had once seemed like a symbol of success now felt empty and cold. The colleagues who sent obligatory gifts but never visited revealed the transactional nature of those relationships. Meanwhile, Jack brought Emma's artwork to brighten the hospital room walls. He remembered how Alexandra took her coffee, 1 sugar, no cream, and brought it exactly that way. He listened, really listened, when she talked about her fears of returning to work or the childhood memories that had shaped her drive for success. 2 weeks after her heart attack, Alexandra was discharged from the hospital. Her doctors advised a significant reduction in stress and a re-evaluation of her work-life balance. Standing in her penthouse for the first time since her collapse, Alexandra felt like a stranger in her own home. On impulse, she called Jack. "Would you and Emma like to come over for dinner? I can order in." "I'm not much of a cook, I'm afraid." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Actually," Jack said, "why don't you come to our place instead? Emma's been asking about you, and I make a mean lasagna." That evening, Alexandra found herself in Jack's modest Brooklyn apartment. It was nothing like her sleek, minimalist penthouse. The furniture was mismatched but comfortable. Children's books and toys were organized in colorful bins. Photos covered the walls, Jack with a beautiful woman who must have been his late wife, Emma as a baby, the two of them at various parks and beaches. "It's not much," Jack said, noticing Alexandra taking it all in. "It's perfect," she replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "It feels like a home." Emma gave Alexandra a tour, proudly showing off her room with its space-themed decorations. "Daddy says I can be an astronaut if I study hard," she explained seriously. "Your daddy is very wise," Alexandra said, catching Jack's eye over Emma's head. During dinner, Alexandra found herself laughing more than she had in years. Emma's innocent questions and observations, Jack's terrible dad jokes, the simple pleasure of a home-cooked meal shared with others, it all felt like a glimpse into a different life, one measured not in acquisitions but in moments. After Emma went to bed, Jack and Alexandra sat on his small balcony, looking at the distant Manhattan skyline where her penthouse stood. "I've been thinking," Alexandra said slowly, "about what you asked me in the hospital, how my approach to life was working out for me." Jack waited, giving her space to continue. "The truth is, it wasn't working at all. I've been successful by every external measure, but I nearly died alone in a park. And the person who saved me was someone I dismissed as not good enough for me." She shook her head. "The irony isn't lost on me. We all have our blind spots," Jack said kindly. "Mine was the size of the Grand Canyon," Alexandra replied with a self-deprecating smile. "But I'm trying to see more clearly now." If this story is touching your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. The journey these two are on reminds us all that sometimes our greatest life lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. In the months that followed, Alexandra made radical changes to her life. She stepped back from her CEO role, taking a position as chairperson of the board instead. She redirected Horizon Technologies' focus more firmly toward affordable medical technology, inspired partly by her own experience and partly by Jack's stories of students whose families struggled with healthcare costs. She also became a regular visitor to Jack and Emma's apartment. Movie nights, weekend trips to museums, helping Emma with her science homework, Alexandra found joy in these simple activities that her previous self would have considered a waste of time. Jack, for his part, never pushed for more than friendship. He understood that Alexandra was in a period of profound transformation and needed space to figure out who she wanted to be. It was Emma who finally broke the stalemate. 6 months after Alexandra's heart attack, during a game of Candyland in Jack's living room, Emma looked up with the directness only children possess and asked, "Alexandra, do you love my daddy?" Jack nearly choked on his coffee. "Emma, that's not an appropriate question." But Alexandra met Emma's gaze steadily. "I think I might," she said softly. "Would that be okay with you?" Emma considered this with grave seriousness. "Do you promise not to make him sad?" "I promise to try my very best never to make either of you sad," Alexandra replied. Emma nodded, satisfied. "Then it's okay." She returned to the game as if she hadn't just facilitated a life-changing moment. Later that evening, after Emma was asleep, Jack and Alexandra sat on his couch, a new awareness between them. "Did you mean what you said to Emma?" Jack asked. Alexandra took a deep breath. "Yes. But I understand if you don't feel the same way. I wasn't exactly kind when we first met." Jack smiled. "First impressions aren't always accurate. My second impression of you, watching how brave you've been through recovery, how you've reevaluated your priorities, how wonderful you are with Emma, that's the one that matters to me." He took her hand, and Alexandra felt that same flutter in her chest that she'd experienced in the park. But this time, it wasn't a warning sign, it was a beginning. 1 year after their disastrous first date, Jack and Alexandra stood in Central Park, near the bench where she had collapsed and he had saved her life. Emma danced around them, chasing butterflies in her flower girl dress. "Ready?" Jack asked, offering his arm. Alexandra nodded, taking it. "More than ready." They walked toward a small gathering of people, Jack's colleagues, Alexandra's family, Emma's friends from school, and even some of Alexandra's business associates who had proven themselves true friends during her recovery. Under a canopy of autumn leaves, with Emma as their enthusiastic ring-bearer, Jack and Alexandra exchanged vows. They promised to see each other clearly, to value what truly matters, and to remember that sometimes, life's greatest gifts come disguised as disappointments. At the reception, Alexandra's mother leaned over to whisper, "I told you that dating app was a good idea." Alexandra laughed. "Yes, Mother, you were right. But it wasn't the app that brought us together, it was life having a better plan than either of us could have imagined." As Jack led her onto the dance floor for their first dance, Alexandra caught sight of the Manhattan skyline in the distance. Her old life was still there, but it no longer defined her. What defined her now was the man whose heartbeat she could feel as they danced, the little girl watching them with a gap-toothed smile, and the knowledge that sometimes, our greatest blessings come after our greatest humbling. 2 years later, Alexandra sat in a hospital room again, but this time, she wasn't the patient. In her arms was a tiny bundle with Jack's eyes and her determined chin. "He's perfect," Jack whispered, one arm around Alexandra and the other holding Emma, now 8 and fiercely proud of her new role as big sister. "Our family is perfect," Alexandra corrected gently. As she looked at the 3 faces she loved most in the world, Alexandra thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a cold, ambitious CEO who judged a man for being 7 minutes late to a woman who had learned that the true measure of life isn't found in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in moments like these. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about how differently this could have turned out," Alexandra replied. "If you hadn't been in the park that day." But I was, Jack said simply. Sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be, even when we don't know we need to be there. Emma leaned in to look at her baby brother more closely. Remember when I asked if you loved Daddy, she whispered to Alexandra. I knew you did, even before you did. Alexandra smiled. You're wiser than all of us, Emma. That evening, as Jack put Emma to bed and Alexandra gently rocked their son to sleep, she reflected on the title that would once have defined her, millionaire CEO. Now, she had so many more meaningful titles: wife, stepmother, mother, friend, advocate. Her company was thriving under its new direction, bringing affordable medical technology to communities that needed it most. Jack had started a science enrichment program at his school, partially funded by a foundation Alexandra had established. Together, they were building something neither could have created alone. As Alexandra placed her sleeping son in his crib, she thought about the woman she had been that night at the restaurant, judging Jack for his modest career and single fatherhood. How little she had understood about true wealth then. Life had given her a second chance, literally, when her heart had stopped in that park. But the real second chance had been the opportunity to see beyond her own narrow definition of success, to recognize the value in a man who showed up late to a date because he was taking care of his daughter, who volunteered his weekends to help others, who rushed to help a stranger in distress without hesitation. Jack appeared in the doorway, watching her with their son. He's finally asleep? Alexandra nodded. I was just thinking about how much I love our life. All of it, the chaos, the early mornings, even the Legos I step on in the middle of the night. Jack laughed softly. That's how I know it's real love. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her, both of them gazing down at their sleeping baby. In the quiet of that moment, Alexandra felt a completeness she had never found in any professional achievement. Thank you, she whispered. For what? Jack asked. For being late to our date. For being in the park that day. For seeing something in me worth saving, not just my life, but my heart. Jack kissed her forehead gently. We saved each other, I think. As they stood there in the soft glow of the nightlight, Alexandra knew with absolute certainty that this family, this love, this life built on second chances and revised judgments, was the greatest success story she would ever be part of. And somewhere in the universe, she was sure, someone was nodding in approval at how perfectly imperfect it had all turned out. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more reminders that life's greatest blessings often come disguised as disappointments, and that sometimes, the people we dismiss at first glance are the very ones destined to change our lives forever. Mark Davis stood frozen in the pouring rain, watching as the woman's car swerved dangerously across the highway. In that moment, he had to make an impossible choice: continue driving to the interview that could finally pull him and his daughter out of poverty, or stop to help a complete stranger. What happened next would alter the course of both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. But how could he have known that missing this interview would lead to the opportunity he'd been waiting for his entire life? If you're moved by this story of fate and second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more incredible true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary moments. The alarm blared at 5:30 a.m., and Mark groaned as he reached over to silence it. His small apartment was quiet except for the gentle patter of rain against the windows. Today was the day, the interview he'd been preparing for weeks. Regional manager at Westfield Corporation, a position that paid nearly double his current salary. No more scraping by, no more explaining to 8-year-old Lily why they couldn't afford new shoes or the class field trips. Mark showered quickly, the lukewarm water a reminder of the utilities he struggled to pay. He dressed in his only suit, slightly worn at the elbows but still presentable, and checked on Lily, who slept peacefully in her small bedroom decorated with hand-me-down furniture and drawings she'd made herself. Rise and shine, pumpkin, he whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. Big day today. Lily rubbed her eyes and smiled up at him. Your interview day. That's right. Mrs. Rodriguez will be here in 20 minutes to take you to school, okay? I've made your lunch already. Breakfast was quick, cereal for Lily and coffee for Mark. His stomach was too knotted with anxiety to eat. 3 years as a single dad after his wife's death had been a constant uphill battle, but this interview could change everything. "You're going to get the job, Daddy," Lily said confidently as she hugged him goodbye. "I just know it." "From your lips to God's ears, sweetheart," he replied, kissing the top of her head. The drive should have taken 45 minutes, giving him plenty of time to arrive early. Mark rehearsed potential interview questions as he navigated through the increasingly heavy downpour. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the deluge, and traffic slowed to a crawl on the highway. That's when he saw it, a small blue sedan hydroplaning ahead of him, spinning wildly before skidding toward the concrete barrier. Without thinking, Mark pulled over, put on his hazard lights, and ran through the rain toward the crashed vehicle. Inside was a woman about his age, dazed and bleeding from a cut on her forehead. The airbag had deployed, and she seemed disoriented. "Ma'am? Can you hear me?" Mark called, trying to open her door, which was jammed from the impact. She nodded weakly, her eyes unfocused. Mark called 911, then stayed with her, holding her hand through the broken window and sheltering her from the rain with his suit jacket. His phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket, probably the hiring manager wondering where he was. But how could he leave this woman alone and injured? The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, by which time Mark was soaked to the bone and shivering. His interview had started 15 minutes ago. As they loaded the woman into the ambulance, she grabbed his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "What's your name?" "Mark. Mark Davis." "I'm Elena Reyes," she said before the paramedics closed the doors. Mark stood in the rain, watching the ambulance drive away. His big chance, gone. With a heavy heart, he returned to his car and checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Westfield Corporation. He called back immediately, but the receptionist informed him coldly that they had moved on to other candidates. What would he tell Lily? How would they make it through another month of barely scraping by? But what if this moment of compassion was about to lead to something far greater than any corporate job could offer? The universe works in mysterious ways, and Elena Reyes was no ordinary stranger. Mark drove home in silence, his wet suit clinging uncomfortably to his skin. He'd have to pick up an extra shift at the warehouse tonight to make up for the lost day of work. As he pulled into his apartment complex, his phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello? Is this Mark Davis?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is he. This is Northside Hospital. A patient named Elena Reyes asked us to contact you. She'd like to see you, if possible." Mark hesitated. He needed to find work for the day, not visit a stranger. But something compelled him to agree. At the hospital, he found Elena in a private room, her forehead bandaged but otherwise looking much better than she had on the roadside. "You came," she said, smiling. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Mark admitted. "I missed an important job interview to help you." Elena's expression changed. "I'm so sorry. Was it something you really wanted?" Mark nodded, explaining his situation, the struggle to provide for Lily, the constant financial pressure, the hope this job had represented. "What company was the interview with?" Elena asked. "Westfield Corporation. Regional manager position." Elena's eyes widened. "Mark, I'm the CEO of Riverton Enterprises. We're Westfield's biggest competitor." Mark stared at her in disbelief. The woman whose life he'd potentially saved was the head of a Fortune 500 company? It seemed impossible. "I don't understand why you were driving yourself in that storm," he said finally. "I like to maintain some normalcy," she explained. "My driver had a family emergency, and I insisted on handling it myself. Clearly not my best decision." She studied him for a moment. "You know, I've been looking for someone to head our new community outreach division. Someone with compassion, quick thinking, and integrity. Someone exactly like you." Was this really happening? Could one act of kindness truly lead to such an unexpected opportunity? But there was something in Elena's eyes that made Mark wonder if there was more to this story than mere coincidence. "I don't have the qualifications for something like that," Mark protested. "You have exactly the qualifications I'm looking for," Elena countered. "The rest can be learned. What you did today, putting a stranger's needs above your own important interview, that's the kind of character I want representing my company." Mark felt dizzy with the sudden turn of events. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll come to my office next Monday for a proper interview. The salary is competitive, significantly more than what Westfield was offering, I'm sure." 3 days later, Mark sat across from Elena in her expansive office on the top floor of the Riverton building. The interview was unlike any he'd experienced, less about his resume and more about his values, his approach to life, his dreams for Lily's future. By the end of the hour, Elena offered him the position, Director of Community Initiatives, with a salary that made his eyes water and benefits that included college savings plans. "Why me?" Mark asked, still unable to believe his fortune. "There must be hundreds of qualified people." Elena's expression grew serious. "Mark, there's something I haven't told you. 3 years ago, I was in a similar accident. No one stopped to help. I nearly died waiting for emergency services. I promised myself that if I ever encountered someone with that kind of compassion, I would do everything in my power to reward it." Mark thought of all the moments that had led to this, his alarm clock, the rain, the split-second decision to pull over. How different things might have been if he'd made another choice. 6 months later, Mark stood on a stage at Riverton's annual charity gala, presenting a check for $1 million to a foundation supporting single parents. Lily sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside her was Elena, who had become not just his boss but a dear friend and mentor to his daughter. The community initiatives he'd developed had transformed neighborhoods, created scholarships, and built support systems for families like his former self. His story had inspired a company-wide culture shift toward compassion and community service. As he finished his speech to thunderous applause, Mark caught Elena's eye. She nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. Sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as obstacles. Sometimes a missed interview can lead to a found purpose. And sometimes, a stranger in need becomes the person who changes your life forever. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories of extraordinary kindness and the unexpected ways our lives can change in an instant. Remember, the next time you're faced with a choice between personal gain and helping others, you never know how that one act of compassion might come back to you in ways you could never imagine.